Reactive training systems.
There's layers to specificity, and I feel like people don't appreciate that enough. That we have this just general vague notion of specificity as it generally looks like the competition exercise. If it's vaguely visually similar, then it's specific, and if it's not, then it's not specific. And I don't think that's a good way to look at it. That there's a range of things that can be either more or less specific depending on how you treat them. It's usually not the very high ends of specificity that present this problem. It's as you start to deviate. Let's take the bench press, for example. Your competition bench press is a very heavy bench press. So benching very heavy in training, yeah, I would agree that that's highly specific. But what happens if it's not quite so heavy? What happens if it's only moderately heavy? What happens if we start to introduce reps? And I think the further you go, you retain specificity in some ways and you compromise it in other ways. The bench press is a good example of this because let's say that you take 85% for a double. How specific is that? Well, it's probably still pretty specific for your bottom range of motion. But one thing that we notice about the way people bench press is there's a fairly significant deceleration phase where people are not really getting as much top end work as you would expect. So specificity from the perspective of the triceps is going to drop off faster than specificity for the pecs. And this bears out when we look at how benchers perform, that early on in a lifter's career, they struggle to get the bar off their chest. And then later on in a lifter's career, they've been doing this for a really long time, they struggle to lock out. And I think my hypothesis is that a lot of the training that you do is submaximal. It's a really good stimulus for getting the bar moving off your chest. So after years and years of doing that, you're pretty good at it. But the triceps are left underdeveloped unless you're doing specific things to address that. So, if you ask the question, what's more specific, an 80% double or an equivalent double with bands? Well, from the perspective of the triceps, perhaps the bands are more specific, but from the perspective of the pecs, not so much. So there's layers to it, and you can figure in muscle fiber types or energy systems or technical components. Like, are you as attentive to your bar path if you're doing a set of 10 as you are if you're doing a set of 3? Things like that. And it's in the weeds, and it's details, and in some cases splitting hairs, but I don't think it's irrelevant. And especially for the more experienced lifters, the lifters who are looking to really optimize or just eke everything that they can get out of this, that stuff is going to matter. I like to spend time on things that lifters are struggling with. It actually is kind of hilarious to me. Someone told me this weekend that their perception was that we didn't train the competition lifts, and that's kind of funny. I mean, we do spend a considerable amount of time training, the colloquially specific movements, but we also do other things, and there are other things that are done intentionally. There are other things where you're trying to create something, you're trying to get the athlete to notice something or experience something. Because look, when you're up there on the platform, that's all that you've got. Maybe you've got a coach that's yelling something in your ear, but for the most part, athletes get tunnel vision, and you're the only one on the platform that's supposed to be lifting this weight. You've got to feel it, you've got to feel what that right position is and know what to do. And that's a subjective experience, and I want to give you the subjective experience that you need to have so that you can practice the right technique when we're in those actually more specific scenarios. This is actually a really important point, because a lot of the reason why people like to stick to the competition lifts only and not deviate from that is because there is a difference in how do you measure things like volume or intensity, and the further that you deviate away from the competition lift is that that's 80% of their competition 1 rep max, but now there's a 2 count pause. And people don't know how to deal with that. So they just choose not to deal with it. And I don't think that's the right answer. I think that's sacrificing something that could be beneficial to the athlete for the sake of the system. And that's not how it's supposed to work. We're supposed to create the system to serve the athlete. I mean, when it comes down to it, the thing that we care about the most is transfer. We want the stuff that we do in training to matter on the platform. So transfer is the thing that matters, and specificity is kind of this heuristic for gauging what's going to transfer well. Things that are more specific are easier to transfer. And yeah, I mean, you can go far enough to where there's no transfer or likely to be no transfer, but it's not necessarily that the specificity or the lack of specificity is causing the no transfer. It's that we're no longer addressing anything that the athlete needs. The reason that going for a run doesn't help you squat more is because going for a run doesn't improve any of the stuff that you need when you're squatting. If you were to address those needs just through some other way, you can see improvement. That's why there's the whole belt squat craze in powerlifting, and that's why. It's not super specific, but it addresses a need. And it doesn't necessarily have to be belt squatting. We can be doing tricep extensions or leg pressing, or pick whatever you want. If it's addressing a need, then it should transfer at some level. The more detail you can have when you're matching up those needs, and the more boxes you can check in terms of needs that you're addressing, the better that transfer should be.